all the interventions basically backfired in a sense that all the exposés, etc., made the cluster a bad name to be associated with. And many brands moved away, and the suppliers do not have any orders anymore, and workers do not have jobs anymore, and they're struggling to get a different job because of the socio-cultural factors as well, that women, for example, cannot travel a long distance. They don't have vehicles to travel long distance, and they are so embedded within this cluster. And there were interventions actually occurred for a very limited period of time, and then it disappeared as well. So majority of the interventions disappeared. They also made factories and work disappear, and there are no other support for workers and suppliers as well.
Welcome to the Research for Good podcast. My name is Professor David Ellis, and today I'm joined by Professor Vivek Soundararajan, who is a Professor of Work and Equality. Vivek, welcome.
Thanks, David. It's a pleasure to be here.
And so your research focuses on sort of inequality and the workplace. What sparked that? Why did that speak to you?
It took a long time for me to understand why I focus on this research. Before inequalities, my research started focusing on labor rights within the global business operations in the garment industries and all, and especially garment industries and all these labor-intensive industries and exploitation within these industries and the interventions that are developed by businesses and government to improve working conditions and why they are failing. We are in 2025, and the issues of exploitation surfaced in media maybe 2 decades ago. And even now, we are talking about exploitation and new interventions, novel interventions. Let's do something with AI, etc., etc. But still, things continue. So my PhD was trying to understand why the working conditions continue to be poor, even despite all these interventions. And one of the important driver is the structural factors which is infused with the inequalities. If you take India, for example, intersectional inequalities play an important role in shaping workers' lives. The caste and gender and various other factors related to the demography shapes, including migration status, etc., shapes workers' lives and how they are treated by employers and the employment relationships. So that was my entry point. And during my PhD, I touched a bit into gender and caste. And later on, I started focusing exclusively on research, on ideas related to gender and caste.
When you say caste, so some people listening may not have heard that term before. Yeah. Can you just unpack that?
Caste in India is very common factor that shapes lives within India and also relationships within India. Not just personal relationships, but also professional relationships. Caste is assigned to you by birth. Historically, there are lots of writings about why caste emerged and how caste is assigned. But the common account is that the caste is a socially constructed idea that divides people according to the kind of occupations they do. Historically, this is ancient history. So you had kings, you had priests, you had warriors, you had and others, etc. And there are lots of mythology surrounding caste as well, dividing the upper caste as the head of the god to the lower caste as the foot of the god. And people who are at the foot of the god are engaged in dirty occupations like cleaning, and they are ostracized by the community. And so even though it was initially divided based on caste and based on occupation and the kind of occupation that they do defined what kind of relationship they had with the society and how society treated them. So those who engaged in dirty work were historically ostracized and became untouchables. Untouchability was a very common thing in the ancient history, even recent histories and contemporary also. The untouchability of certain caste is common in practice, even in elite corporations, but in a different way. Even though things have modernized, caste enters into the modern organizations through who occupies leadership positions, who are employers here. even in IT corporations, for example, which are very extremely modernized. You can clearly define the caste from which people came based on who they are and what kind of positions they hold.
And so when we think about, like, sort of fast forwarding a bit to your kind of more current work,
Yeah.
you know, trying to understand from that kind of management perspective or occupational perspective what's going on in the world of work.
Yeah.
I'm aware that some of your work looked at the Boohoo scandal.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
So currently I'm a UKRI Future Leader Fellow, and the project is funded for 7 years, and I currently got the renewal for the next 3 years. In the first 4 years, we looked at workers' perspectives of their lives within labor-intensive industries. In the UK, we focused on the Leicester garment cluster, and Leicester is very well known for manufacturing garments, and they played an important role during COVID as well as a buffer, given that many brands couldn't source from foreign countries. So the Boohoo scandal, I don't have to repeat it. There are lots of issues found within factories in Leicester, especially modern slavery-related issues, and majority of the suppliers were supplying to Boohoo. And even after identification of the issues and Boohoo promising a lot of things, things were not rectified. So our research was not about whether things were rectified or not, but I mean that's what we started as. Like we wanted to go to Leicester and see, like, what's life is after all these scandals. Boohoo was the initial scandal, of course. The Leicester garment suppliers were supplying to other brands as well. And so we wanted to know, what's life for suppliers and workers in this cluster after all these scandals, all these interventions by the government, by the private sector, by the civil society, all the exposés by Guardian, you name all the newspapers, there's so many exposés about Leicester, and so what's life like? And when we entered Leicester, we found that the problem is. All the interventions basically backfired in a sense that all the exposés, etc., made the cluster a bad name to be associated with. And many brands moved away, and the suppliers do not have any orders anymore, and workers do not have jobs anymore, and they're struggling to get a different job because of the socio-cultural factors as well, that women, for example, cannot travel a long distance. They don't have vehicles to travel long distance, and they are so embedded within this cluster. And there were interventions by including Boohoo, like a model factory intervention, etc., which actually occurred for a very limited period of time, and then it disappeared as well. So majority of the interventions disappeared. Government interventions continued in terms of raid and through the criminal justice perspective, and without any support structures, and they also made factories and work disappear, and there are no other support for workers and suppliers as well. And I've heard from suppliers saying that brands are ready to source from us if we move to Morocco, not from Leicester.
Right. And so when you did this research, you actually go and speak to these workers directly?
We had a team, and I went as well on and off, but we had postdocs were stationed in Leicester for nearly 3 or 4 months, developing networks. And given that it's the Leicester has gone through so many exposés and so many interventions, they were very hesitant to speak to any more researchers. And that is also one of the problems in doing research in these kinds of sensitive areas, that these areas are academically overexploited. And which we are very careful about navigating, and so we spent a lot of time, and we want to tell a different story than what has been covered now, and to bring out the lives and the agencies of the local communities as well, and how they are surviving, what's happening, whether the interventions worked or not, and what could be the different types of interventions that could have worked.
You've anticipated my next question. There was things in terms of interventions, it wasn't really a happy ending.
No.
What would an alternative look like? Right?
No, this is common across these kinds of sourcing locations, and not just Leicester. And the 2 types of major interventions are compliance and collaboration. The compliance interventions focuses on auditing suppliers and penalizing for non-compliance, and And on the other hand, you might think that, okay, they may incentivize for compliance. No, not often. They don't get incentives. Even getting orders is what, it's an incentive. There is no other additional incentives. Often for the compliance certificates, suppliers need to invest their own money, etc. So which means that the benefits might be that the brands might be getting a lot of reputational benefits and all those things out of those certifications, but suppliers do not. On the other hand, you have this collaboration paradigm, which is an intervention where brands try to collaborate with some of the suppliers and try to develop them, etc., rather than penalizing them, help them, support them, etc. And that happens too. I'm not saying brands are all just doing nothing, but some brands especially work with suppliers. Like you have brands like Patagonia, and they work very closely with suppliers and collaborate them, develop their capabilities, etc. Right? So, but also the limitation of that intervention, which we found through the review papers and also through the practice, is that it stops at tier 1 suppliers, which is the top layer of suppliers, and so the supply chain can go much below that. You may think that the supplier who manufactures garment is where it stops, but you have to when you talk about a supply chain, you have to think about who makes your buttons and who makes the thread and who dyes your garments, who weaves the cotton into thread, into textile, etc. There are lots of suppliers, and it's very dispersed as well when it comes to global production. One of the main things that could work is, of course, what we call a systemic intervention rather than trying to focus on the surface level. Often these interventions take individuals out of context, and that is another problem, right? As I said, any intervention has to connect to the structural factors where these individuals and the clusters and industries are located. So multi-stakeholder collaborations are something that would work, which involves also where even in many multi-stakeholder collaborations, what happens is powerful actors would try to take control over the whole collaboration, the brands or the powerful civil society organizations, without giving voice to the workers and the workers' representatives. Often then, even in multi-stakeholder collaboration, these kinds of issues may emerge. But what good multi-stakeholder collaborations would look like is more voice to workers, more voice to worker representations, real representatives rather than fake representatives or superficial representatives, and brands just supporting such multi-stakeholder collaboration to flourish, and interventions developed in collaboration with those actors actually works. And that intervention do not have to be universal. It will be context specific, it will be actor specific, and it will take time. But that's not something that many brands are invested in, and that's a problem. Another successful intervention is legally binding agreements, which are being put in place by this interesting initiative called Worker-Driven Social Responsibility. So until now, all the interventions are just mouthpieces for brands, right? There is nothing legally written about these interventions and what's accountable. If you flout anything, how can we make someone accountable for flouting? And nothing set in stone. So until these legally binding agreements emerged, these agreements actually bind together suppliers, brands, and civil society organizations and third parties on a particular issue. And if, for example, sexual harassment, if someone flouts, then there is a system for holding people legally accountable. And that seems to be working as well. But when it comes to these interventions, scalability is also an issue. Right? It's because it's too narrow, and brands have to invest so much money and time into those things.
So just shifting a little bit. So obviously the world of work continues to shift and continues to change, and more people, due to the power of technology, can work from many places in the world. And you've just finished a piece of research that's looked at IT professionals and how in India, and how they've moved, they, like other parts of the world, have moved to that kind of remote working. I wonder if you could tell me a bit about that.
That's an interesting piece of research, and again, the focus was on trying to understand their lived experiences post-COVID, because the research data collection happened post-COVID. And we spoke to all these workers working for major multinationals located in India, both the foreign multinationals but also Indian multinationals. And India is very well known for software manufacturing and services as well, right? Not just making software, but also offering services, IT services, and back-end services as well. So we wanted to know what's happening within this area, what workers think about their work lives, etc. And home work became very prominent when we were speaking to these workers. Immediately after COVID, during COVID, of course, naturally we were all working from home. But the Indian software industry saw that as an opportunity. Initially, what was a reactive action following COVID and regulations limiting office work became a common thing on seeing the reduction in the real estate cost and the increase in technological adaptation. So until now, many workers still work from home. There is not a big push for workers to come back at all, which then creates a lot of interesting insights about how is this happening within this context. And I know there is so much research on remote work, but most of the research talks about global north experience, where everything is, internet is stable, electricity is stable. You live in a...
Yeah, it talks about it that it's happening. It doesn't actually explain what it... That, as you say, that lived experience.
Yeah, you live in a very simple family, like where, like, either a couple... or you live alone, away from parents, etc., which is very common in the Western settings. But when you take India, often the level of analysis itself is not individual analysis. And when you take remote work, often the focus of analysis will be like individual work-life balance. Over there, it is not. The level of analysis itself is a household level analysis because multi-generational family live together. Right? It's not a shame to live with your parents, like in the Western setting. It's common. And also, when you live in multi-generational families, for example, you have a lot of family dynamics that you have to navigate, and you also have a comparison between technological infrastructure. If you take, often you see power outages in India. And you need to have like backup power systems, which is often you have to invest on those backup power systems. And you have internet at home, like which means that the families, your mother-in-law or father-in-law, or your mother or father watching TV, then like you have to manage bandwidth, the signals, which are not often strong in many places where they live. Many workers moved back from where they were working to their homes, which often are not within cities. So some of these become extremely problematic, and especially when it comes to internet and dealing with household and all those things. And so that was unique in a sense that the lived experiences of these workers were giving us a lot of interesting insights that we didn't read about within the global north remote work experiences. Right? Say, for example, the power outage where the supervisor was asking the worker to go and take a picture of the home and maybe power outage in the neighbor's home to prove that there is a power outage. It's a very paternalistic, patriarchal setting, which is in India, where there is less trust between the supervisors and the employees.
I was going to say it's interesting because it raises a whole lot of questions around surveillance.
There are lots of monitoring technologies as well, and we workers often talked about how constantly they were monitored and different types of monitoring technologies where some observes your typing and your presence and screen and how they were flouting those systems as well of the monitoring technologies. And as I said, like monitoring went beyond just like monitoring technology to monitoring homes. That created a lot of rift between family members too. Right? So in this sense, and of course, many family members talked about positives related to remote work where they can take care of the family, etc. But I guess the challenges they faced when the electricity was off, when they had twins and the kids crying when the electricity is off, and then they had to manage this and that, and how supervisors were using their power to govern from distance. Because of lack of trust, and all the responsibility about taking care of your health, taking care of your living space, taking care of your working space, all these are responsibilities were put on to employees. We often, as social science researchers, are not really creating these desirable or thinking about desirable futures, theorizing, understanding, or even trying to propose a desirable future. But I guess it's also often connected to how social science works. We are more interested in trying to understand things that has already happened or currently happening rather than the future. One of the important things that we need to do is co-constructing the desirable future rather than creating a desirable future ourselves and imposing it on someone else. That is desirable for us. Maybe is it desirable for those who actually are going to live in those desirable future.
You've been listening to the Research for Good podcast. To find out more about research in the School of Management, you can visit our website or click the links in the episode description.